is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Shane Hannon owns a software company. He's got to visit customers all over the country. So there's only so many ways to do that, right? And Shane has done all of them, including by bike, 2 wheels. You got it. It was such a great experience. He had to write about it in his book entitled How to Bicycle Across America. Shane.
You know, I kind of looked at this and said, well, you know, I've traveled all over the U.S. for business, and I've been in airplanes doing 300 mile an hour. I've been in interstates doing 75 mile an hour, just driving around, and thought to myself, well, it might be good to see the country at 16 miles an hour on a bike and try and do the same thing. So that was one of the inspirations for it. But the nice thing was I was able to combine it with business. So what I'd do is I'd send my roller bag ahead with all my business gear in it to the hotel I was going to end at, because I did this in segments. When I got to that hotel, all my business gear would be there, so I'd go out and do some appointments.
It says 32 days from start to finish, 2,800 miles from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and you did mostly the southern states, so over what, how many months?
Every year I did a segment. So
5 years.
It was over 5 years, and the nice thing about that, you know, you didn't get bored with it, because 32 days on a push bike, you know, you might get sick of it. But it just gave me the opportunity to come back and regroup and plan out the next section of that ride, which was half the fun's in planning everything, right, and preparing for it. So every year I had something really cool to look forward to. I crossed the Sierra Nevadas,
right,
the lower mountains in Arizona and New Mexico.
Okay.
And then you come to this point in the United States halfway across the country that's called the Great Divide,
right,
which is apparently the high point. And at that point, you're expecting all downhill, and it's more or less just a little crest that you go over. Then you have these prevailing headwinds most of the way. But it's like most people go, they go the other way. They go from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
right.
And I guess because I'm in Arizona, I thought, well, you know, I don't know if I can really do this or not. So let's start in San Diego. So each section I did, I built more confidence, which was good, because going across West Texas, there's pretty much nothing out there, right? More animals than people. And at some point, you're cruising along and you just stop, and it's like, you know, a Mega Man out there. There's just no one around. And then going along the Gulf Coast, along the Gulf states, was just absolutely beautiful. It's eye-opening down there. I didn't expect the beaches to be as nice as they were. White sandy beaches everywhere. They actually call it the Forgotten Coast down there. So it was beautiful. It was really cool.
It's a beautiful country.
It is. America is a beautiful country indeed, and I think it is an eye-opener. You get a real appreciation, not for just the country, but also the people as well, because it's pretty diverse. Everyone was real welcoming, and they're curious, so it was very cool.
What kind of bike?
Fairly low-end bike. It's an REI bike. I paid $500 and something for it, so it wasn't expensive. The equipment's got to be reliable, and you've got to know how to fix things. But it's more about the person and, you know, just the will and the persistence to keep going. So anyone can do it, I think, just taking a section at a time and doing piece by piece and concentrating on that rather than looking at the whole thing. So it was really cool.
What was the worst?
So I tried to plan it out really well. And out of the 32 days, I only had 1 day of rain, and it was when I left New Orleans to Biloxi, and it pretty much rained for 10 hours. And I prepared for it, but I can tell you, when you're 10 hours in the rain, everything gets wet, everything.
Yeah.
So I was completely saturated. My shoes, because you sweat while you're riding as well, so you are like you're in a wetsuit, basically.
Yeah.
Everything dried out, and the next day was just absolutely glorious. So I did only have that 1 day of rain, and it gave me all the rain I needed for the 32 days.
Did you do any training?
Well, I started off just riding to the gym of a morning, which wasn't that far, and then I started to enjoy the riding more, so I'd get out on the weekends. You know, be confident about it. You probably need to do at least 100 miles in a day, and if you can get to that level, you're pretty good. You can get to facilities and services or hotels or help if you need it. And once I got to 100, it wasn't that big a deal. I thought, well, I could probably do another 20. So it's amazing your body, how it can adjust to things like that. And
so did you go from hotel to hotel or bed and breakfast to bed and breakfast, or did you camp?
They basically call me a credit card traveler. You travel with hardly anything, and your goal is to get to that next hotel every night, and which was great, because after you've done a lot of miles, all you can think about is a hot shower
Yep.
and a nice comfortable bed.
Yep. Yep.
So that was the way I did it. But these ones that camp out, like I said, my hat off to them. They definitely do it tough, and
Yeah.
it's definitely a different experience. The fact that I was on my own, there was no support group, was a little different to everyone else, and breaking it up over a period of time. And I would send an email out to my family and just say, hey, this is the night after I got to a destination, say, hey, by the way, I made it. I didn't get run over by a truck or bitten by a snake. And I'd tell a story about what happened that day of maybe someone I met. And as time went on, over that 5 years, more and more people got added to that email chain. And there was probably 200 people on this email by the end of it. And if I missed sending that out, they would be like, hey, what's going on? Where are you? So the email and the stories kind of became, bigger than the ride, more or less. And that was kind of the motivation for the book, because, it was about people, that you think about in life and the struggles they go through, and their persistence and how they continue on, and everything works out in the end.
All right, Shane, nice job. Our next author, Pauly Libsyn, is one of the most prolific authors here at Page Publishing, all thanks to writings she found after her mother died. She's now published book number 4. It's entitled What is Love? And book number 5, My Mother and Shakespeare. And she's got a 6th book coming out in the spring. We're going to talk about 2 books today, number 4 and 5. Pauly, you are unbelievable.
It's a lot of books. And after that, I'm going to take a break.
But I mean, you get pretty good service with Page, right? I mean,
oh, fabulous. Are you kidding? It's the greatest company ever. Page will do anything for me. I mean, I can't praise them enough. They're just fabulous. And by this time, I really basically know what I want. And I tell them, and then we work together. And it just goes.
Now, all of these books were born out of this treasure trove that you found after your mother died.
Right. These 2 books is What is Love? And that is the biography that I wrote about my parents and their love story, because I had started to lecture at various colleges, and people could not get over the story that I had to tell of what occurred behind the poetry. And they said to me, you have to write a book telling this. So I sat down, and I know you're not going to believe this, but I gave myself an assignment. And I took 4 days off from work, and I wrote that book in 6 days. And I started like at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and I finished at 7 o'clock at night.
Jeez.
And then the following morning, I would do the same thing.
So you first published...
Immortal Kisses, Confessions of a Poet was the book that my mother and I were working on together. Okay. And then she passed away. Right. Then I found more poetry, and I published Songs of You, a postscript. Then I found her essays, and I published Silhouettes, Literary Passageways. And then I wrote the biography, What is Love? Which, when people read it, they can't put it down, and people are telling me they finish it in no less than 2 days. They can't put it down. And then what happened was I found my mother's papers that she wrote when she was in college on Shakespeare, and they were in this old textbook that she had saved from her college years. And I realized that it was really a portent of things to come. So I had to publish those papers. And in that book, which is called My Mother and Shakespeare, A Daughter's Journey, you can see the original papers with the teacher's comments on it and the grades. It's unbelievable. And then what I did was I wrote a whole story as to why she saved those papers. That section is called A Daughter's Journey, and that's fascinating. And I'm telling you, I would never, ever, ever have found those papers. I would never have published them, but I was driven, and I couldn't stop.
Yep.
I couldn't stop, Alice. And this book, What is Love, the biography that I wrote about my parents and our story. I've never written a book before. I've just edited my mother's works, and I've just written forwards and introductions and the author's notes. But I wrote a 180-page book for the first time in 6 days. It was crazy, but I couldn't stop. I felt myself being pulled in all different areas, and I found my parents' scrapbook that had been packed away by my mother, and I learned all about my parents and their lives together and what they went through, which I never knew. And I truly believe that that was because it was so private and so romantic that they couldn't share it with me, but it all happened before I arrived. So that part of their relationship was theirs and theirs alone. They met on the beach when my mother was 12 years old and my father was 17. He was a lifeguard. She was a young girl. She fell madly in love with him, and she wanted to capture him. And the way she did it was by bringing books to the beach, because she felt that she could interest him in reading, because she was an avid reader at 12 years old. And she captivated him. And at the end of the day, he would climb down off his lifeguard chair and he would listen to her. And he would also invite her up on that lifeguard chair with her books. And he actually began to read them. So at the end of each summer for 5 years, because this happened in Far Rockaway, she packed him up with all these books, and she got his address, and she gave him hers, and they corresponded. And my father began to fall in love with her. Then World War II broke out. My mother went to college. My father had already graduated from college, and they lost touch for some reason. I don't know why. And then one day, miraculously, my mother was coming home from New York City on the subway, and she always got off at the Kew Gardens subway station. She lived in Forest Hills,
Right.
and his office was in Queens, and he was heading into the city to return 2 tickets to the ballet. And the train came in from the other direction, and all of a sudden my mother gets off the train, and she sees him in the distance, and she was screaming. She went flying over to him, and he couldn't believe it. He was transfixed. And they hugged and they kissed. He asked her, "Would you like to come?" And she said, "Of course." And so they went into the city that night. They went to the ballet, and then my father proposed marriage at dinner that night.
No.
Yes. So I said it's divine intervention, because it was meant to be. It was meant to be from the beginning.
And it was meant to be for you to find your mother's writings and to write all these books, Pauly. It's, a real tribute to your family. I'm looking forward to number 6. Okay, we got to take a quick break, but we are coming right back right after these words. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books, and unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them, and they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. J. Pierre migrated from Haiti to the United States when he was 19. It was a difficult journey and one he wrote about in 2005 before he went to college. Now he's finally published that book. It is entitled The Life Experience of a Self-Respecting Black Man. And your first stop was right here in New York City, where you would think people would be open-minded.
My dad was in New York. That's why I came to New York first. When I first came here, I did not have the ability to express myself in English. And because I was driving a BMW, it was a used BMW, and I got pulled over by so many police officers unjustifiably. And I was asked many questions. For example, what do you do? Do you do drugs? And all that of questions. At that time, I didn't really have the ability to respond to them. And they pulled me over all the time, even if I never done anything wrong. And as long as they see me on the road, if they were coming the opposite way, they turn around and pull me over, search my car unjustifiably. And when they couldn't find anything, and they told me to go. That's what I've been through so far in the beginning when I first came here. When they couldn't find anything in my car, and they let me go, and they give me a few tickets. Some of the tickets I couldn't even read and understood them. And because I was Haitian, and the African Americans wanted to beat me up, and they see me as a stranger, and they notify me by the way I dress, because I used to dress long sleeve shirts and shoes, and I had to change my physical appearance. And I had a part-time job from 4 o'clock to midnight. Sometimes I go home at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I had to change the way I walk on the streets to go home, change the way I walk, wearing extra large clothes so I can blend in, so to avoid getting beaten up. That's what I'm saying when people are talking about racism, and my conclusion to racism is it's not a question of white and black, and racism is in all predominantly black communities. It's in predominantly white communities, and white countries and black countries as well.
Yeah.
And it's all over the world. That's why I said to some people, I don't believe in racism, and replace it by colorism, because that's what's going on right now in all over the world.
Yeah. So you say that you make recommendations on what we can do about this.
Okay. People need to be more educated, especially the police officers. I want the police officers to be well educated. If they become well educated, they would be able to make the difference between a bad guy and a good guy, and they would not be based on the skin color. They would be based on judgments.
Yeah.
But I would have to be well settled to talk to the NYPD, because I can tell you the police are very, very illiterate when it comes to things like that. They don't listen. They don't really listen. I would have to have a good arrangement to do that.
Well, I would hope they would listen, because I don't think people can even imagine what it's like to be targeted like that, based on nothing but the color of your skin and the way you dress and the way you talk. I mean, it's really hard to wrap your head around. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Jeanne Phillips has always been an observer, a people watcher, if you will. And after he retired from his job at the Chicago Transit Authority, he started writing down some of his observations. And now he's published his first book. It is entitled 300 Philippisms.
I wrote that about 6 years ago. When I heard somebody say something or I see something, I write a commentary. I started writing all of these commentaries, and one day I asked my sons, should I write a book? And they said they thought it was a good idea, so I started writing more and more commentaries, and so I picked 300 based on the 300 Spartans, which led us to this phone call.
So what's a Philippism?
Philippisms?
Yeah.
It's 300 commentaries. Now, Philip based on my last name, all right?
Right.
And ism, that's a colloquialism. I remember growing up hearing black people of the greatest generation talking a lot of ism talk, which means foolish or crazy talk. So I figured, why not? That's how we got isms.
So commentary on everything. Politics, family, kids, life.
Yeah, it's, I call it the faction. Part fiction, part fact.
So give me an example of what I'm going to find in your book.
Okay, ism number 110, where I talk about people who cross the street talking on their smart or cell phones and not looking both ways to see whether or not there are oncoming vehicles. Yeah, it says people who talk on smart or cell phones while crossing the street without looking both ways for oncoming vehicles must have powers and abilities far beyond those of the rest of us mortals. They must be able to sense that vehicles are approaching them. They must have the ability to know whether or not the drivers of these vehicles are paying attention to the road and not elsewhere. They must have the awesome power to know whether or not any of these drivers are under the influence of some kind of substance. Finally, they must be able to detect whether or not vehicles are in perfect working order so that there is no danger of getting run over.
Right, and we're going to find 300 of these babies in the book.
Right, now that's commentary on reality. I've had that situation where I'm coming down the street. I remember just driving down the street one night. I had the light, right? And this young woman is crossing the street, and I can tell she's looking down at a smartphone, walking across the street against traffic as if no cars are out there. Now, if I hadn't been paying attention, she could probably ended up a fatality. And then I have, humorous stuff, like at the end of my book, number 300, another great American saying that applies to one's alcohol drinking habits, describing the tippler as someone who drinks like a fish. This is a dumb analogy. When was the last time you saw a tuna sandwich holding a cocktail glass? So,
Do you get out and talk about your book anywhere? Do you read these isms anywhere?
Matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was in one of my particular watering holes, and I was telling people about the book, quoting some things, some isms from the book, pounding the pavement and talking about the book like I'm talking to you.
Okay, so you go to your watering hole and you hang out and you talk about the book. How's that working out for you?
Well, I have the guy I know. He's a jazz pianist. Okay, he has a show that comes on Sunday nights here in the area called Jazz Tropical. Okay, a fellow by the name of Marshall Vente, and he's put out a piece on the book, mentioning that something that you can talk about at cocktail parties and elsewhere. That I have my sons. They're putting out word for the book, and like I said, when I run into certain people, I bring up the book. So it's a kind of a combination of things.
Well, I can just see you at an open mic night, Jeanne. Think about it. Finally, Jack Overbay likes all things cowboy, and when he's not doing commercial real estate in Phoenix, he writes. This is his 5th book with Paige, and it's called Hobo Cowboy.
Everything about Westerns. That's my favorite. That was my father's favorite, and together he and I used to go to the movies in the old days when Tom Mix and all those people were on the screen, and I just fell in love with the Western cowboy, and that's what I've been writing. It's about a young man that left home from Kentucky and went out west to see the Shining Mountains and his adventures on this trip, and after he got there and when he returned home. I thought it was a pretty good story. I've written more than one.
So you've given me a nice overview of what all of your books are about, but this one, in your blurb, it says, as Chief Sitting Bull stepped up on the porch, he turned to face the crowd. My friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Journey of a young man that left Kentucky in his early years, not quite 20 years old, and has traveled over the West, things that he's done, and most of them are all true. I hoboed when I was very young, and I went to Oregon and worked on ranches and in the timber and lumber mills and things like that. And I just drew from the experiences I've had myself. Going to go to different parts of the United States, working for a railroad company, being a troubleshooter for them, finding out all the problems and solving them. Sitting Bull was a friend of one of the characters in the book, and it's true, by the way, and all those names are true. Everything I write is pretty well verified. Remember, my family was part of the rodeos out west and stagecoach drivers. He was killed, shot off the stagecoach seat by supposedly a bullet blank, and things like that. I mean, Bill Chestnut. He traveled back east to Boston. He traveled to the plains in Texas, Oregon, different places in the United States on behalf of the railroad. He's fallen in love with a young lady that's on a ranch in Oregon. They've had their problems. He's fallen out of love right now, but she goes off to college because of her father, and they're separated for a while, and she gets into trouble. She was raped. She left him before that happened, so he's all downhearted, and he took revenge on the three men that raped her and put them in jail.
All right, so he fights for her honor.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And also Sitting Bull and every Western book there is always a moral. Cowboy of the Old West, most of them were hardworking, honest cowboys,
Right.
and they lived their life out on the range, and they were true and honest people. And that's the way I grew up with my father. And he hoboed to the west, and he worked on this particular irrigation ditch in Weezer, Idaho, and he was telling me all these stories when I was growing up as a young boy. I was one of 9 children, and I was the only one that ever did anything that he had done when he was young. So I hoboed to Oregon myself.
Wow.
And I worked on cattle ranches and did everything. So I'm pretty familiar with the life of the cowboy.
Okay, so what's the moral of the story?
Well, do your best and be honest. That's the moral of my story, and that's the way I've treated my business over the years, and I've done very well.
Do your best and be honest. I like that, Jack. Good words to live by. And that's a wrap for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. Thank you for stopping by. And if you missed anything or you just want to listen to any show you want, any time you want, for as long as you want, as many times as you want, just go to 710WOR.com and download the podcast. In the meantime, we're already working on the next edition of the Page Publishing Book Club, so we'll talk again soon. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.